Hello again, APUSH B, C, G, and E students. Mr. Connor here with part 2 of the period 3 review, the Revolutionary Period, 1754 to 1800. And we'll be looking at basically the Declaration to the Constitution, this 11-year critical period where America goes from being a group of colonies to going through not one, but two forms of government. And away we go. Dum, dum. All right, so what's in this review? We're going to start by looking at independence, particularly Declaration, the Articles of Confederation, as a whole on a national scale, state activity during the Articles period, this would be the 1780s, what led to ditching the Articles to the Constitution, and then I'll look at that Constitution. And the next video is going to be the first 10 years or so of the government under the Constitution, the early Republic. So here we go. All right, there's our Declaration of Independence, probably the most famous document in U.S. history up there. So what about this thing? Well, two influences I want to look at. One is very influenced by the Enlightenment, which remember from the colonial period, this period of philosophy about reason and logic and natural rights as opposed to an emphasis on faith and emotionalism. So one part of Enlightenment thinking is what's called the social contract. It comes from John Locke. It's the idea that governments are formed because people agree to come together and form governments, and they pick people to rule them, and governments then have certain obligations towards those people. The biggest being natural rights, and Jefferson lays them out as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we all have these rights. Thus, it is the job of government when we come together to form this social contract to protect these rights. And then he lays out the argument that, well, if a government violates these rights and does so on a consistent basis and does not relent despite attempts to mitigate that, then people have a right, yea, an obligation to get rid of that government. That's the sort of abstract justification for why a group of people would separate their political bonds from another and declare independence. So that's a huge part of the Declaration. And it's the earliest part. Most of the Declaration is a list of grievances. They're rather vague. They don't necessarily refer to specific events. It's sort of the evidence part of an essay. And a lot of that evidence comes from a republicanism influence. So if you remember from the last video, republicanism, this political ideology that leaders need to be virtuous and you have to guard against leaders being corrupt if they're not serving the public interest. So if you look at the evidence presented against the king, it amounts to corruption. He's done this, he has done that. He's violating our rights. Here he is trampling over our existence. It's trying to suggest very strongly that the king is corrupt, which violates the social contract. So it's really a two-pronged attack. He's violating the social contract and being corrupt. All right, and then of course, it ends with the actual declaration. These colonies are independent, and it has a major legacy. The Declaration. This is something that goes forward through time. The preamble part about all men are created equal and have certain natural rights is the part people are going to go to the well to. Other nations, when they declare independence, will borrow the language of the Declaration. Almost any rights movement, women's rights, civil rights for African Americans, you name it, will dip into this language and suggest that, hey, if this is what America is supposed to be about, we need to be a part of it too. Because, of course, the original language, Jefferson's a white male who owns people. So when he says all men are created equal, he might have had something very particular in mind. But the legacy is you can go back to this language and update it and say, this needs to refer to me. So that's a powerful legacy. And it's a great example of the revolution goes well beyond the intentions of the people who started it, which maybe is what makes it revolutionary, eh? All right. So this government they form after they declare independence, it's a constitution known now as the Articles of Confederation. It's in existence for about 10 years. And there's a great little cartoon there I found online. That website is great for just cartoons reviewing AP periods. I might put a link to that. And that guy is not giving the figure, I don't think. It sort of looks like he is, but I'm going to say he's not, because I wouldn't put it up there. So the only thing outlined in the articles are something called a Congress. So there's no president, as the guy says, no president, no executive agencies, no judiciary. It's all about the Congress and what it does or doesn't do. So it's set up, every state gets one vote, so you could send 5 people, but when it comes down to vote, the state gets 1 vote. And any major law needs 9 of the 13 states to agree to it. So it's not a simple majority. It's complicated to get things passed. Also means that any 5 states together could block any law. And then if you actually want to change the system, you got to get all the states, all 13 out of 13, to amend the actual articles. So if you look at some of this stuff, the Congress can't tax. Well, if you want to pass a tax, you got to get all 13 to agree to that, because that would be an amendment. And of course, the famous example is 12 out of 13 agreed to a small import tax, and Rhode Island said no. Rhode Island! And, thus, no small import tax was even made. And as the guy pointed out in the cartoon, there's no executive, like there's no president, there's no Supreme Court. It's a Congress set up in this way. It's meant to be a small government because of republicanism. You didn't want a tyrannical king. That's what you had just overthrown. So you go to a very loose, deliberately weak central government. Nonetheless, that will be attacked, but there's some notable accomplishments. The Land Ordinance of 1785 is a way of selling land, so the Congress can make some money doing that. It's a way of organizing land. Some has to be set aside for education. The Northwest Ordinance, which I bold-faced, even more important, that it sets rules for how this land that is not states now, known as the Northwest, this would be like Illinois, Indianapolis, that part of the nation, how are they going to become states? And I think I want to take a moment and really say this is pretty revolutionary, in my opinion, because every new state will have to have a Republican government, so you can't, Ohio can't be a kingdom or something like that, and every new state will be equal. So there's no special status to the original 13 states. Virginia and Massachusetts can't be like, well, we were the first, we should get extra votes because Plymouth Rock and Jamestown or something. No, none of that. And I think that's an amazing revolutionary thought about equality, that all states come in on an equal basis. So that is some accomplishments there. And you could spin this and say the fact that it's such a weak central government gives the individual states a lot of wiggle room to kind of play around. Republican government here, small r, is pretty new. And what are you going to do? And the states do some interesting things, which leads me to our next one. And what the heck is that? Well, you'll find out in a second here. But the states during the Articles period, a lot of them try out some reforms. Many northern states abolish slavery. In fact, what we have that over there on this side is Chief Justice Cushing of the Massachusetts State Supreme Court. These are his notes for the case that ended slavery in Massachusetts. And he says there, it's hard to read. He says, a different sense has taken place within people of America, more favorable to natural rights of mankind. And he's suggesting like, wow, during this period of revolution, we now think differently about rights, and we need to apply it to more people, and thus end slavery. So that's a pretty revolutionary decision in 1783 for Massachusetts to make. So there's that. Some states get more democratic. Pennsylvania allows almost any man to vote. New Jersey, by the nature of its language, ends up letting some property middle-class women vote, which lasts for 33 years. So that's pretty revolutionary. Virginia has the first religious freedom law, which basically will become the First Amendment to the Constitution. So there's no official church. You can belong to any church or not church that you want. Virginia even has a manumission law, which makes it easier to free slaves. And there are about 10,000 people who get freed under that. It does not end slavery in Virginia. But I'm just trying to show that there are some reforms going on. Of course, there are some states that actually go the other way. Maryland is an example of actually has very strict voting laws. So right next to Pennsylvania, which allows many people to vote, you've got Maryland, who allows very few. So there's different levels. It's AP, right? There's going to be nuance and complexity and all that good stuff. Okay. So, despite all this, the articles do not last. So why are they ditched within 10 years? And what the heck is that picture there? What's going on? Well, one is the lack of revenue becomes an issue. That the Congress, yes, they can sell land, but they have a hard time raising money. So that's going to come to a head. You want to make a revision where you can do that. Another is paper money. Congress prints paper money. States print their own paper money. There's massive inflation. Some people won't accept paper money. They want gold and silver. It creates a real mess. So there's a need to have a stable currency. Britain, there's trade issues with. Britain had this mercantilist relationship with its colonies. Well, now that they're no longer colonies, Britain excludes them from this, and the Congress doesn't have a lot of power to do much about that. States have their own tensions between them. There's this land out in the Northwest, which is not part of any state. And until the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, a lot of states claim parts of it, so they're ready to duke it out over that. If states not necessarily get along with each other. Shays' Rebellion, which is what this picture is. Debtors in Massachusetts who want to pay off their money with cheap paper money, and the state says no, and they go to the capital. They go to Springfield. Sorry, I think they go to Boston too. The rebellion is put down. It's not really a rebellion, but there's this fear. Henry Knox writes to George Washington, we must clip the mad wings of democracy, that you got to get these peasants with pitchforks out of the way. So you can look at the Constitution as a rollback of a lot of the democratic experiments, which is, it's a conservative response. So this Constitution there, another famous document, right up there with the Declaration, allows, this stuff, I hope, that you've got checks and balances, 3 equal branches, they're all equal. Congress passes laws, but the president's got to sign them and he can veto them, but the Congress can override them and then the courts interpret them. Separation of powers, Congress does some things, the courts do others, states do others. The Great Compromise, establishing the House and the Senate, one based on population, one every state gets 2. That was needed in order to create it. And then, sadly, the 3/5 Compromise, where southern states were basically saying, we will not join this unless you give some guarantees that we get basically extra representatives in Congress because we have slavery. The idea that a South Carolina congressman is representing the people he owns is just ridiculous. But they won't come in unless they count. The North doesn't want to count them at all. South wants to count them fully. They come up with 3/5. So it's a really ugly built-in feature of the Constitution. There are 2 other references to slavery as well. All right. Above all, it does give stronger federal power. The power to tax being the biggie, and thus there's a fight. Some people like the article system, don't want to give it up. They are known as anti-federalists, an interesting twist, because federalist would actually be someone who wants to preserve a balance between state and central power. But the defenders of the Constitution call themselves federalists, even though they're kind of not really, and label their opponents, which is a great tactic. Still, it takes almost a year to get this ratified. It's not a guarantee that the Constitution is going to happen. And it isn't really until New York and Virginia agree that it will become a thing, because they're the 2 biggest, most powerful states. So that's the end of part 2. Send in any comments and questions. I will have part 3 tomorrow. Hopefully we also have a nice AP update, what this test is going to look like. And I'll send some short answer stuff out tomorrow as well. I hope you are doing well. I might send out a little video, some guitar playing I was doing. Yeah. So have a great night and sleep well, sleep in, all that good stuff. I will talk to you all later.